yes, 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 yes. No, fuck, shit.
Hot take. War arcs suck. They are the worst arc of their series. And listen, to me, a war arc should have everything I would ever want. It's got all the characters coming together for a really emotional and climactic event. But I hate them, because they always disappoint. The hype you feel when the war slowly builds up, and then eventually watch it crash and burn, it's just a horrible feeling. Of course, it doesn't mean that they're all horrible, but I can confidently say that there are very many that are not done well. I've chosen 3 war arcs that have very unique qualities that make them stand out, and by combining these, you should be able to craft the perfect war arc for your story. Bleach 1000 Year Blood War just goes so hard, and there's no denying that. If there's one thing Bleach knows how to do, it's action. And a war arc is basically all action. Now, as a Bleach fan, even I will admit it's not completely perfect. And for all 3 of these, I will give the main aspect that is holding them back from being perfect war arcs. And what held this arc back was the sheer amount of villains, especially all of them being newly introduced at the same time. See, in other arcs there were previously established villains like Aizen, Ichimaru, Tozen that were properly built up. And the other villains were given proper time to have unique backstories and motivation that made them feel more different from each other. The Stern Readers are only differentiable by their personalities that you kind of get to see within their fights. But it usually ends very quickly before we really get to see anything about these characters. And it just wouldn't be possible to give development to all of these new characters. There are 26 Stern Ritters, 1 for each letter of the alphabet. To put it into perspective, there were only 10 Espada, so more than double them. The war gives a lot of previously established characters moments to shine, and that's great, but most of the villains just serve as someone to fight for the heroes. But to delve into more of the positives of the war, it is just pure non-stop action and fun. I hate a war arc which is supposed to be this exciting climactic event turn into a bunch of stalling and exposition and waiting around. The build-up is supposed to happen before the war starts. When it actually starts, it's go time. You gotta show the audience what they came for. And Bleach goes absolutely nuts with this, showcasing some of the best fights I've ever seen. For example, Yamamoto versus Yubaha is one of the best pieces of action, and it really stands out in this arc. Because he is the main villain, Yubaha actually has a good reason and a motivation to be fighting. We get to see the vendetta between the Soul Reapers and the Quincy's play out in a more personal way, with Yamamoto and Yubaha essentially being century-long rivals. For the entire run of each part of 1000 Year Blood War that has come out, I have not seen the stakes drop once and the action not continue to ramp up. There's pretty much no dead space, and it even gets extremely brutal. Characters get killed off and others get to redeem themselves. It plays out like an actual war where we get to see different perspectives of the different fights happening, and they don't take forever to finish. Unlike Naruto's war, which was way too long. There was so much unnecessary stalling, and some of the fights straight up felt like filler. 1000 Year Blood War definitely succeeds with its pacing, and I feel like this is what made it so well received. Absolutely no bullshit, just pure thrill and excitement. Now, Marineford is probably the one that most people are gonna say is like the objectively best war arc. And you know, I wouldn't be completely mad at that take at all. It's just not perfect though. I mean, it barely cracks my top 5 One Piece arcs of all time. And I will admit, I think it suffers a lot from the time period it was created in. Because if we're being completely honest, the action is a little lackluster. The pacing does drag on at some parts. I mean, it is such a huge event with all these different players coming in from the story so far. And they all fight each other in this all-out brawl, and at the end of the day, it was a little bit underwhelming in terms of the fights that were actually happening. I think a lot of the scenes were just amplified by the sheer marvel of what we saw happening. Again, if it was remade in today's modern animation and pacing, I think a lot of these issues would go away. I'm not saying the story was lackluster or underwhelming, I'm just saying the actual action, like the fights that we got to see within it, some of them just weren't as amazing as I thought they would be. And honestly, other than that, Marineford has the best plot of any war arc I've ever seen. Ace's execution being the catalyst of the war makes this whole war so much more personal. It makes it so that the war isn't just a reason to fight, but one where the main character actually has an emotional investment in the fighting that's going on. Like I said with Bleach, most of the characters don't really have any personal convictions or connections with the people they're fighting. Marineford is personal to Luffy because Ace is his brother. And even more so, a lot of the characters that fight within Marineford have history together. What Marineford lacks in action completely makes up for it with narrative. Some of the best redemption arcs we've seen from Mr. 2 and Mr. 3. and seeing interesting lore being teased like Crocodile losing to Whitebeard many years ago. While there weren't any one-on-one fights like there would be in a normal war arc, we got to see a lot of different character interactions, and those would set up for many important plot points later on. For example, Jinbei joining the Straw Hats and Law teaming up with Luffy. I think Marineford is one of the most genius arcs in One Piece because of how Oda used it to impact the rest of the story. Ace's death, Whitebeard's death, and Blackbeard changing the course of the story as we know it. And the ending to the arc was one of the biggest payoffs you could ever seen in any war arc. Ace's death led to actual emotional tension, instead of some bullshit reason for the war to end. Like any good war arc, it starts to ramp up at the end. Kobe's call for peace, Shanks showing up to stop the war, Whitebeard saying the One Piece is real, and Akainu being a menace made up for all the stalling in previous parts. And just saying, y'all gotta stop sleeping on Akainu. The admirals were bodying the pirates the whole time. Marineford really masters what a lot of war arcs neglect, which is the emotional stakes and impact it has on the characters. Ace's death permanently changed the course of the story, and that's what makes a war arc brilliant. The Shibuya incident is one of the most popular arcs to come out in recent times. It really escalated everything we had seen in Jujutsu Kaisen to a different level, but in this case actually maybe too fast. The classic timeline of a war arc usually happens near the end of the story and sometimes even being the finale to the story, and that's because it's supposed to be a final showdown with all the characters. With GGK, they went ahead and just dropped it in Season 2. And that sounds like a genius way to accelerate the stakes of the story, but my main problem here was that there were so many underdeveloped characters, and not just on the enemy side, but also on the main hero side. And I think I would have preferred to get to know a lot of them more before they were put into a fight, because I honestly had no reason to care about them. I wanted to see what was happening in the war, not get introduced to a new character. They should have either not been introduced in the war or had been introduced previously. And to make matters worse, a lot of the characters that were previously introduced, like the Kyoto team, were completely power crept out of the story, all within one season. The characters who did get to shine really got a lot of character development. Mahito and Jogo especially had an amazing, crazy fight with a satisfying end to their character. Like Thousand Year Blood War, Shibuya had pretty much no stalling and it was just complete action. As any good war arc should be, it finished strong with memorable fights like Sukuno vs Jogo and Todo and Yuji vs Mahito. What it did better than most other war arcs was how it handled character deaths. In the grim world of GGK, character deaths should happen, or else it would just feel like a cheap way out. In a war arc, deaths should even happen more so. And Shibuya definitely has its fair share of deaths. And not small character deaths like in My Hero's war arc. My Hero killed off characters like Midnight and Crust that didn't really impact the story at all. JJK's war arc had all the catastrophe curses die, which were the main antagonist group, and even had huge main characters like Nanami and Nobara die. The war arc never shied away from doing unexpected things, and that made it a complete thrill ride. So if we combine all three of these, you should have a perfect war arc. Like Bleach, there should be no dead space, no stalling, no bullshit. The action should feel non-stop. Like One Piece, there should be a personal reason to the war, making it much more personal and emotional. And like JJK, the consequences should feel huge and have meaningful impacts on the characters and the rest of the world. Those are the three key elements you need to have to make your war arc so much better. If you want to work with me